Hey there, how are y'all doing? So today I'm going to be reviewing the movie Just Like Heaven, made in 2005 and directed by Mark Waters. Now, you may recognize that name Mark Waters from the movies The Spiderwick Chronicles, Freaky Friday, the 2003 one, and my favorite, Mean Girls. So a few things need to be addressed about this movie right off the bat. First off, it's a rom-com. Surprised? Uh, it has a lot of those familiar things about a rom com. It has some stakes. You have a guy and a girl. You have all this turmoil that goes in between them. You have some misunderstandings. You tend to have cliques of people, especially the girls, that come together and say that this guy is not worth your time, yada yada. This movie is a little bit different than that, in the fact that, well, spoilers here, that the main character, played by Reese Witherspoon, is in a coma for most of the movie. Uh, Her body is anyway. We'll get there. Um, and you have Mark Ruffalo, and this is the first movie I saw him in. This is right around the time of 13 going on 30 when I saw him in that too, and he was just that kind of guy that was getting these parts of the likable guy in the rom com. He's decent in this movie. He starts out a bit dull and a bit frustrating, but he gets better with time. So what's this movie really about? Well, you have Reese Witherspoon starting out in the movie, and she's a nurse, and she's that kind of nurse that'll just take on people's shifts, and she'll work until she is pretty much dead, and it quite literally happens here. She ends up being on the clock for 26 straight hours, and she ends up getting forced home, and on her way out, her supervisor ends up giving her a promotion that she was working for that entire time. And there was this other guy that is kind of her adversary in the workplace. She's not exactly against him in terms of disliking him, but she's aware that he's vying for this spot as well. But she's actually getting all set up to go on a blind date, and it's one that her sister Abby set up for her, and she's so excited, but she ends up going into the wrong lane as she's turning up the music, and she gets into a big collision with a T-bone, and then the lights go white, and that's the end of that scene. So you don't actually see what happens to her. You kind of just presume she's dead. Well, okay, if you weren't thinking in the frame of a rom com, you might think she was actually dead. If this is like an actual drama or like a horror movie or something like that. Anyway, um, after that scene, you have this landlord of sorts who talks about how this place is just like heaven. Ah, ah, ah. Okay. And she's talking with Mark Ruffalo, and he's just looking around, and he's just like, "Yeah, cool, sweet. The couch is in." And his way of having guy talk is just like, "I like the couch," or "I'm not a fan of the couch," or just take a shake shake his head of disapproval, and then they move on from there. Um, as it turns out, this is a little bit after the accident, and they have this piece of paper out, and they are advertising this apartment that's a sublet, and it supposedly is usually really booked, except, well, you have this person, Reese Witherspoon's character, who ends up being in the hospital, um, pretty much on her last limbs of sorts. and he likes the couch, and that's how you know he likes the apartment. That's his code. That's decent. Then you see him pretty much turn the place into a bachelor pad, which, yeah, I've subletted a place before for a summer from a bunch of sorority girls once upon a time. I I made the place my own. You know, I left some things up because they're gonna come back in just a few months. It's a long story, but anyway, he's making the place his own. He doesn't really have to worry about anything. And then Reese Witherspoon's ghost or presence starts appearing to him and giving him a lot of smack about putting things on the table without coasters. That's her big no no. She has a few of those, but that's her really big one. You know, don't ever put a cup of hot stuff on the table without putting a coaster on it. And to be fair, you know, the the furniture, it's pretty nice. You don't want to ruin it. I get that. But it's still pretty spooky when you have someone in your apartment that you're supposedly on your own in, and this ghost is talking to you and is bugging you and won't let you sleep. And then she pulls a few tricks. You know, you have the behind the mirror scene in the bathroom. You have her hiding in the fridge while he grabs for another beer. She provides some pretty good commentary. It's amusing. But you get the feeling something's off about this guy, aside from the fact that Reese Witherspoon is in his apartment haunting the shit out of him. You think something's a bit whack, or okay, fine, something's wrong, something's not right here. And after some time, it comes out that through a wedding video that Mark Ruffalo's character watches, that he had a wife and then she passed away, and it's just been really hard for him to move on, and it just hasn't been working for him. And yeah, it's a pretty dour moment. Um, but this is the time where Mark Ruffalo's character becomes a bit more human, and you start to think, oh, well, no wonder he's been hard to work with. He seems very frustrated. Now, supposedly he's an architect, but you don't really see him do a lot of things on the job. This isn't that kind of movie. This is not the kind of movie where you're like watching people, you know, do real life. You know, you're not watching him go make plans of things. You see like his aftermath of his days of work. You see his interactions with Reese Witherspoon, and you see Reese Witherspoon's days as a nurse. You know, before the big accident. Um, but here's the thing: Reese Witherspoon still believes that she's alive. That's what really keeps this moving in the first third or so. That she is convinced that she is alive, and she's fed up that this man is in her apartment. Fair enough. I'd be pretty fed up too if someone was just crashing my apartment, you know. If someone just barged in right now and started messing with everything, yeah, I'd be pretty pissed. Seems fair. Um, but she doesn't realize that she isn't in her body as most people would, you know, because this is the fantasy element of the movie. But then she keeps walking back and back until she is right in the middle of this table, and she's standing in the middle of it, but there's no hole, so her body is just going through the table. I have to admit, the effects they had in this movie were pretty good. They were quite enjoyable actually. They set they set the mood that you know Reese really was having a hard time figuring out what to do, and that the light that would shine in at different times It really made this scene um, more appeasing to the eyes. You also had the San Francisco sights. They were beautiful, for sure. Um, you really got a feel for the city as well. Now you have this friend of Mark Ruffalo's, who plays the dad in Grounded for Life, probably around the same time as this movie was released back in 2005, around that time. Um, he plays a similar character to the dad that he plays in The Grounded for Life. He's that goofy, happy-go-lucky guy. Supposedly, he is Mark Ruffalo's therapist, but he's a very unconventional kind of therapist. But it's it works. He does end up coming into play later, in a decent amount, um, and you spend a lot of time building these interactions between Mark Ruffalo and Reese Witherspoon. They have a really great chemistry, to be honest with you. They have a good first few interactions of being pissed at each other, and you can tell that they're obviously not, hitting it off right away. And even though you could say that Mark Ruffalo's delusional, he's at a vulnerable point in his life where having someone talk to him, he's just entertaining at this point because there isn't really a lot of other options because she keeps following him. And in this world, it's hard for him to really get away because she'll follow him out to different things. He tries to go to the bar one night, for example, with his friend JJ, and his therapist friend. It's complicated. But she follows him and makes Mark Ruffalo look like an ass at the bar, and so that's not gonna work. He gets thrown out, and that's not gonna work. Um, so he's at this point just trying to make amends with her and be peaceful. After, of course, this whole onslaught of different kinds of jokes about things to do to get rid of spirits, except hers is a little different because she's in a coma, as you'll find out. Um, Turns out the person that runs the strange bookstore, I kept hearing him talk, and I was just like, dude, that's like Napoleon Dynamite talking. And that's because it is Napoleon Dynamite talking. It's so weird. It's so weird. But this movie was a year after, or like a year or so after the Napoleon Dynamite movie was released. And they were talking about the director and the other people that were running this movie were talking about, well, who should we have for the bookstore owner? And someone was saying that we should have someone like the Napoleon Dynamite guy. And the director said, well, why don't we get the Napoleon Dynamite guy? I think it worked, honestly. I could tell who it was just from his voice. He didn't have nearly the same hairstyle that he did in Napoleon Dynamite, but you could still tell it was him just on that voice. That same kind of chill stoner kind of voice that he had. Um, just that righteous, like, gosh, like, just you could go on and on with different things about Tina and eating your food. But anyway, he's pretty funny. Um, and he lets Mark Ruffalo know that this spirit's not going anywhere. And he also lets Reese Witherspoon know that Mark Ruffalo is having a pretty hard time and that maybe she should be a little more respectful. And it's just really funny because, okay, well, the line here is show some respect for the dead. And at this point, it's not quite revealed that she's in the coma, They just showed the crash happen and it looked pretty fatal. Um, but you start to wonder, well, why is this story happening? What are they going to like bring her back to life? And in a way they do, man. Um, After some time, they start to figure out just what Elizabeth did. Um, they they look around the city a bit. They try to trace some clues down. Um, they end up going to the wrong house one time, and uh, Mark Ruffalo ends up getting some money in the process as a result. But it was right across the street from the head nurse that would have told him everything. Of course. Um, I think the big thing about this movie is that while it's fairly predictable and a little schmaltzy, I mean it's a rom com. Um, maybe not. I That doesn't necessarily make it right, but it makes it expected and it doesn't surprise me. And additionally, it does have charm to it. But for one thing, the writing. The writing is really fun in this movie. You have Napoleon Dynamite in this movie, who's a riot. You have Reese Witherspoon and all of her witty lines. You have Mark Ruffalo and his reasonable reactions. You have a chemistry that's actually present throughout and that actually grows. It's not instantaneous love from the get go. It does take its time and grow and grow and grow. And even towards the end, when you expect this one scene to happen and you just are just waiting for them to, get it over with and get the big kiss and all that stuff, because this is the kind of movie you watch because you know the ending. Really, it is. Um, Even when you think when they're in the hospital and they're trying to bring her back to life, and you think it's big kiss is gonna happen and everything's gonna happen, she still doesn't recognize him, and you think, oh shit! Like, okay, you know it's gonna come together at some point, right? It's gonna happen, but you were expecting it then, and you're like, oh, you're gonna play something out, aren't you? What are you gonna do? So then they they have the chemistry doesn't work. He gets carried out, and then she ends up moving back into her place. But after her family left, she went upstairs and this and he's up on the roof and they end up having a big kiss. But let me back up. So there's a place that tends to be in Reese Witherspoon's dreams in the beginning, and it's this beautiful, beautiful garden. And then you realize that she's just dreaming. Yeah. Um, but it turns out that after all this time, um, Mark Ruffalo ends up designing this garden for her, and it's the garden on top of this rooftop, on top of her apartment, and that's where she meets him, and then they touch hands, and then they have the big kiss, and the crowds cheer, it's so great, it's nice. And you know what? This movie makes you wait and wait and wait, and you know what? It pays off. I would say it pays off. Really, it's worth the time. Because at that point you're just like over the moon and just like, finally it happened. Um, but let's talk about some pros and cons outside of whether or not it was a rom com. So pros, they spent some time with the kind of ghost spirit thing. I haven't really seen that happen too many times. I'm sure it's happened before. I'm sure someone will give me an example, but I just don't see it that often, all right? Maybe I just don't see enough movies. Maybe after some time I will get this understanding of, oh, well, you're just borrowing from this, or you're just doing that. Okay, that makes more sense as to why you're frustrated. But this movie has pretty funny writing. Reese Witherspoon is enjoyably sassy. You can see why she's very hard nosed, but likable. She's she's a hard worker. She knows what she wants. Um, she was going on this blind date. She wasn't totally against men. She was just pretty wrapped up in all of this stuff and all of her work. And she loves her patients, that's the big thing. She loves taking care of people. And so maybe this is her time to be taken care of and figure out what to do before she comes back to life. There's some drama towards the middle where um, it comes up that they're wanting to take her off life support, and of course the person that's in charge of this is the competing doctor. You really get to think that he's an ass by the end of this movie. You just kind of wish he would up and die. Okay, maybe I'm being a little extreme here, but you're not fond of him. All right, you're pretty peeved. Um, and supposedly Reese Witherspoon was talking about how, with life support it should be ended, but of course now, she wants to come back. Of course. Um, you have the small world connection of the Mark Ruffalo being the blind date of Reese Witherspoon. Of course. That one wasn't too hard to figure out. Um, Really, the big thing that was hard to figure out was, why is Reese still here? And after some time, you think, oh, she might still be alive after that. But that wasn't my first thought. Hell, I knew he was the blind date before I knew that she was still alive. So, there's that. Um, Reese Witherspoon is really charming. She brings a different kind of romantic style than she did with Legally Blonde. That's Legally Blonde is pretty much a straight up comedy, and this is a dramedy. um, Mostly on the rom com aspects. They have some ghost features. They play with it a little bit towards the middle of the movie. After that, they spend a lot more time developing the characters, and I think that was for the best. These are characters that you actually feel like that you would see around town. You feel like you'd see someone that's trying to move on past his wife's death. Um, you feel like you probably live with someone that's a constantly working nurse or constantly working person, period. Hardly ever in their apartment. You have a little bit of a scene with a nearby neighbor named Katrina, who's a smoking hot babe, and she wants some of Mark Ruffalo, and he's a little enticed at first, but after some time being built up with Reese Witherspoon, he ends up flubbing up her character's name, which is Elizabeth in this movie. It's Elizabeth. And so, yeah, flubbing up a girl's name is pretty much gonna get you not just in the doghouse, but will never get you in the lot ever again. So, yeah, let's just say it's a good thing Ruffalo wasn't hedging his bets on being with Katrina. Um, and Mark Ruffalo's character's name is David, I'm pretty sure. And anyway, some of the lines that worked, let me just read them for you. Um, this place is heaven. Of course. I like the couch. It's not. That's a great. Oh, I've been seeing someone. Okay, that had to be a little funny. Um, let's see. Communicating is not her problem. Obviously not. Let's see here. I may have been a lonely, home-wrecking whore, but I was saving lives, and that comes from the wrong house. When Mark Ruffalo and Reese Witherspoon come up to the wrong house on the other side of the street from the head nurse, um, where the guy assumes that it was his mistress. Let's see here. You're not dumb, just a little uneasy. That's fair. Let's see here. You want to dance on the beach in Bali? And this is where it comes down to Mark Ruffalo at this point is just so swept up in love that he's wanting to take Reese Witherspoon's spirit pretty much anywhere. You know, this is a movie you watch when you want to feel good about things. When you're just down in the dumps and you're just like, oh, this is awful. But I will say, even though you watch it when you feel good, you'll be sad for a fair amount of this movie, but it pays off in the end. And so if you're in the mood for kind of like a tearjerker that's going to pay off, this is the one for you. Um, this isn't really, I don't know. Obviously, I'm going to like Mean Girls a lot more than I'm going to like this movie, but I do like this movie, and I do think it's worthwhile. I would probably go somewhere between, um, well, I probably would say honestly between like a B plus and a B. I'd probably say a B plus. Um, Even though it's a romantic comedy, there's a little more at stake here. You actually have someone that's in a coma and trying to recover, and she ends up meeting in her spirit life this guy that she was going to go on a blind date with before she got in the accident in the coma. Um, you have characters that are actually interesting. You have supporting characters that are actually interesting. You have a beautiful, beautiful city of San Francisco to work with. You really have some charm and charisma and some solid writing. You have some fun effects with the ghosts and the spirits. You have a hilarious performance from John Heater, the Napoleon Dynamite guy. Um, you have a lovable therapist in JJ, who turns out to be like Abby's Reese Witherspoon's sister in this movie, Abby's ex-boyfriend that she ended up making out with right before her wedding, and that didn't help things out. Um, just lots of stuff. I would say this movie had a good mix of writing and charisma and characters that made it, more likable than your standard rom-com. Though it still has plenty elements of your standard rom-com. It's not one of the best movies of all time by any means. It's got some things of unrealistic aspects. Mark Ruffalo not getting any felonies for breaking into a hospital and stealing supplies. Sometimes it helps in this case, it kind of detracts from it a little bit. But even though this movie is schmaltzy and it will make you cry a little bit, if not a little more, um, it's it it pays off. That's my thing. It just has such a wonderful ending that it makes the whole journey worthwhile. So even when it gets a little rocky at times, even when it gets bogged down in hijinks sometimes, or schmaltziness, or over the topness, or oh my god, is he not going to get charged with anything? Ness. It's worth it. This movie is worth a watch, so I probably would um, go between a B plus and a B on this one, really just depending on the day. Um, we'll just call we'll just call it a B plus for the day. And I'll be working on The Shining for the quest for the best, and I'll figure out I'll figure out how to incorporate both Mask movies because I've seen them now, The Mask and The Son of the Mask, and so I will figure out just how I want to review those as well. All right. So this was a good one to watch. Definitely good after Legally Blonde. Um, Coming back to Mark Ruffalo after seeing him in Shutter Island, visiting Reese Witherspoon once again, absolutely worthwhile. She's fantastic. Um, yeah, so That's all I've got for this one, and we'll see about The Shining and The Mask and Son of the Mask as well. That's gonna be a doozy. All right, I'll see y'all later. Have a good day. Bye.